My name is Grace Miller, and I was 34 years old when I arrived at my father's memorial service and discovered that I had been erased from his life in front of everyone who came to mourn him. I stood in the back of a funeral home chapel in Chicago, wearing the black dress I had bought the night after his final hospice transfer, holding the program in one hand and my father's old silver wristwatch in the other, and realized my name was missing. Not misspelled, not misplaced, missing. The printed program listed his wife Carol, his stepdaughter Amber, his son Evan, his brothers, his church friends, even the neighbor who watered his hydrangeas. But not me. The slideshow playing near the front showed my father with Carol's family at holidays, with Amber's children at pumpkin patches, with Evan at baseball games, with people who came into his life long after I did. There was not one photo of me on his shoulders at Navy Pier, not one picture from my high school graduation, not one image from the hospital months when I was the person answering hospice calls at 2 a.m. and fighting insurance denials before sunrise. I walked toward the front row, where family seating had been reserved, and Carol stepped into the aisle like a guard at a locked door. Her black dress was perfect. Her widow face was perfect. Her voice was low enough to sound polite and sharp enough to leave a mark. "Grace, this section is for his real family now," she said. "You were part of his first family." Before I tell you how I walked into an estate attorney's office 4 days later with hospice call logs, funeral receipts, bank transfers, a memorial seating chart, and the will naming me executor, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels before I tell you what happens when a step family uses your labor in private, erases your place in public, and then discovers your father left the legal keys to the truth in your hands. Because the memorial was not the beginning, it was only the first time Carol said out loud what she had been doing quietly for 22 years. My father, Thomas Miller, married Carol when I was 12. My mother had been gone for 3 years by then, not dead, just gone from our daily life after a divorce so bitter that adults stopped using her name around me like it was a curse word. Dad did the best he could in the beginning. He packed my lunches badly, learned how to braid my hair from a library book, came to my spelling bee even though he smelled like warehouse dust from working the double shift, and always carried a silver wristwatch that had belonged to his father. He tapped the face when he was thinking. He tapped it before making decisions. He tapped it when I lied and he already knew. Time tells people what love would not, he used to say. I did not understand that sentence when I was a child. I understood it much later, standing over bank records and funeral contracts with my father buried and his second wife trying to sell his house before I could read the fine print. Carol entered our lives as a woman who knew how to organize everything except kindness. She had a daughter from her first marriage, Amber, who was 2 years older than me and already trained in the art of soft exclusion. Amber never screamed at me. She did not need to. She just took the center seat on the couch, took the good bedroom when we moved into Carol's house, took Dad's attention by calling him our family's steady man, and then acted wounded if I noticed I had been moved to the edge. Carol called it blending. I called it being folded smaller until I could fit in the leftover spaces. Holidays changed first. Christmas cards went from Dad and Grace to the Miller-Hayes family, then to Carol, Thomas, Amber, and eventually Evan, after my half-brother was born. My picture disappeared from the front of the refrigerator. My birthday dinners became, "We'll celebrate this weekend if Amber's schedule works." I was invited late to family events and told not to make Carol feel unappreciated. If I objected, Uncle Richard, Dad's older brother, would say, "Let your father have peace. Carol keeps him steady." Peace became the word everyone used when my silence was required. I learned early that Carol did not need to ban me from my father's life. She only needed to make my presence feel disruptive. Dad loved me, I know that. But love that avoids conflict can still leave a child standing outside closed doors. He would slip me $20 for school books and say, "Don't tell Carol, she'll make a thing of it." He would take me to breakfast alone and say, "You know you're always my girl." Then he would go home and let Carol decide where I sat at dinner. That contradiction shaped me more than his affection did. I became an estate paralegal because paperwork, unlike family memory, did not get to rewrite itself based on who cried the loudest. I worked with wills, probate filings, hospice invoices, bank forms, beneficiary changes, funeral bills, and adult children discovering too late that the person who controlled access also controlled the story. I became good at reading the small lines people skip when grief makes them tired. My mentor, Marin Cole, was an estate attorney with a voice like polished stone and a rule for everything. "Grief does not cancel fiduciary duty," she told me during my first year after a widow tried to empty an account before the executor had even been notified. "Sad people can still move money. Tired people can still lie. Paper protects the dead from the living." At the time, I thought she meant clients. I did not know she was teaching me the language I would need for my own father. Dad's illness started as fatigue and ended as a calendar full of oncology appointments, pharmacy calls, oxygen delivery windows, and hospice paperwork. Carol wanted to be seen as the devoted wife. She was good at the visible parts, sitting beside him at church when he still had the strength to go, posting updates with folded hands emojis, arranging flowers in his room, telling visitors she was taking it day by day. But when the real paperwork came, she disappeared behind emotion. Insurance denial? She called me. Medication refill issue? She called me. Hospice equipment delivery? She gave them my number. Pharmacy copay problem? My debit card came out. Utility bill overdue because Carol said she could not think clearly? I paid it. Funeral pre-planning deposit? I handled it because she said talking about death felt cruel. That became the pattern. Carol controlled access to Dad's room, but I controlled the hard systems that kept him comfortable. Amber posted photos holding his hand and wrote, "Showing up for the man who raised me." I was on the phone in the hallway with the oxygen company. Evan was 18, quiet and sweet in a passive way, and Carol used him as a human shield whenever I asked questions. "Please don't upset your brother," she would say. "He's losing his father." As if I was not losing mine. The person who saw the truth most clearly was Janet Rowe, Dad's hospice nurse. Janet was blunt, practical, and kind in the way people become when they have watched too many families perform love and avoid responsibility. She knew I was the one answering calls. She knew Carol avoided medication logs. She knew Amber arrived for emotional moments and left before paperwork. One night, after I corrected a pharmacy error that would have delayed Dad's pain medication, Janet touched my shoulder and said, "You are the primary contact in every way except the one your family admits out loud." That sentence lodged somewhere deep in me. I did not know how much I would need her to say it again later, in a room full of people trying to turn me into a distant daughter. Dad apologized during his final lucid week. It was late afternoon, pale winter light across his hospital bed. Carol gone to pick up something she said was urgent, though she came back later with a manicure. I was sitting beside him with his medication schedule open on my phone. He asked for his watch. I took it from the dresser and placed it in his palm. His fingers were thin by then, the skin almost translucent. He turned it over, then handed it to me. "I should have done better," he said. I told him not to talk like that. He shook his head. "No, I let Carol make you feel like a guest in my life." I cried then, quietly, because part of me had waited 22 years for that sentence. He told me there was a letter in the will packet, and that Marin's office had the updated documents. I stared at him. "Dad? What documents?" He closed his eyes for a second, tired from the effort. "You read the fine print when everyone else wants the easy story." Then he tapped the watch face once. "Time tells people." He died 9 days later. Carol called me at 5:18 a.m. and said, "He's gone." Not "your father is gone," not "come over," just "he's gone," as if even death belonged to her first. I handled the first wave because that is what I had been trained to do. I called the funeral home. I called hospice. I called the pharmacy to stop deliveries. I notified the utility company. I paid the funeral deposit because Carol said Dad would have wanted dignity and she could not access enough cash quickly. I emailed childhood photos for the slideshow because the funeral director requested them. I sent 3 photos of Dad and me, one at Navy Pier, one at my graduation, one from the summer he taught me to change a tire. I sent a short paragraph for the obituary. "He is survived by his daughter Grace." Carol replied 6 hours later, "I'll take care of final wording." That should have warned me. The memorial program did not include me. The slideshow did not include me. The family row did not include me. At the chapel, when Carol said, "First family," it felt like she was not just cutting me from the service. She was trying to retroactively cut me from his life. Amber gave a speech about Dad teaching her how to trust men again. People cried. Evan read a poem. Uncle Richard spoke about Carol's devotion. Janet Rowe sat 2 rows behind me and watched with a face so still I knew she saw everything. I sat behind distant cousins because I refused to make a scene beside my father's casket. But when Carol said, "Don't make his memorial about paperwork just because you helped with bills," something inside me went cold and clear. Helped with bills. That was what 22 years of daughterhood had become in her mouth. The next morning, the estate attorney's email arrived. Marin's office had sent the executor packet to my personal email, not Carol's. The subject line read, "Estate of Thomas Miller, Executor Confirmation." I opened it at my kitchen table with Dad's watch beside my laptop. The will named me executor. Not Carol, not Uncle Richard. Me. There was also a letter in Dad's handwriting. "Grace, if they make you stand outside my story, use the papers I left you and walk in through the front door." I read that sentence once and had to get up from the table because my knees did not feel steady. The man who had failed to protect my place in life had protected it in paper. Late, imperfect, but real. Then I read the rest of the packet, and grief became something sharper. Dad had named Carol as beneficiary of certain personal property and provided a structure for Evan's support. But the estate required formal accounting. There were notes about bank accounts, memorial donations, the house, and a warning in Dad's own handwriting that large transfers during illness should be reviewed. That line sent me straight into audit mode. I did not call Carol. I did not call Amber. I gathered documents, bank statements, hospice records, funeral contract, obituary edits, slideshow submission emails, utility bills, will packet, beneficiary forms, memorial donation ledger, if it existed, text messages, payment receipts, Dad's medication schedule logs, Janet's call history. And then I found it. In the last 3 months of Dad's illness, $48,700 had moved from Dad's account into Amber's account across several transfers labeled care support. Amber had not been providing care support. She had been posting photos and leaving before the hard parts. There was also a pending house sale consultation scheduled for 72 hours later, before the estate inventory had been completed. Carol had been trying to move fast. Too fast. Maren Cole came to my apartment that evening after I called her. She had been Dad's attorney first, but she had also been my mentor for years. She reviewed the packet, the will, the transfers, the funeral receipts, the program, and the slideshow emails. She did not say much at first. Then she looked at Dad's watch on the table and said, "You are not being emotional by asking for records. You are being executor." I needed that sentence, because I already knew what Carol would do. She would say I was attacking a widow. Amber would say I was jealous. Uncle Richard would say I should let grief breathe. The family would ask why I was making everything about money. They would ignore that I had been the one paying when they wanted dignity and disappearing when they wanted credit. I accepted executor authority formally that afternoon. I froze informal estate distributions, requested full accounting, notified the bank of disputed pre-death transfers, asked for the memorial donation ledger, and canceled the rushed house sale consultation until the estate inventory was complete. One acceptance, one boundary, one silver wristwatch on the table beside the first document Carol could not edit. At 10:58 p.m., Carol called. She did not say hello. "What did you tell the attorney?" Her widow voice was gone. "I accepted the executor appointment." Silence. Then, "You had no right to do that before speaking with me." "Dad gave me the right in his will." Amber's voice came on next, sharp and panicked. "This is disgusting, Grace. He just died." "Then why was there a house sale consultation scheduled before the inventory?" Carol grabbed the phone back. "We needed to understand options." "Before I saw the bank records?" Another silence. Then Carol made the mistake that told me I had stepped exactly where they feared. The house sale was supposed to happen before all this legal drama. There it was. Panic confession. Supposed to happen before accounting, before executor review, before the first family daughter they erased from the program walked through the front door with the will. I said, "No estate asset moves until the records are complete." Carol started crying then, but it sounded different from the memorial crying. Angrier. "You are punishing me because you were hurt by the program. You removed me from my father's memorial. You were part of his first family. And I am executor of his estate." That sentence hung between us like a door closing. Uncle Richard called 20 minutes later. "Grace, let Carol grieve in peace." I asked him if peace included $48,700 in transfers to Amber. He stopped talking long enough for me to understand he knew less than he pretended. I gave Carol and Amber 72 hours. Return all estate documents. Provide the memorial donation ledger. Disclose every transfer. Correct the obituary record. Preserve house records. Cooperate with formal accounting. Carol whispered, "Don't do this to your father's memory." I looked at his watch. I'm doing what his memory asked me to do. Then I hung up. The smear campaign started before breakfast. Carol posted that grief had been complicated by someone choosing paperwork over healing. Amber posted a picture of Dad holding her son with the caption, "Real love cannot be measured in bank statements." Uncle Richard called 3 relatives and said I was using executor power to punish a grieving widow because I had never accepted Dad's second family. People texted me things like, "This is not the time," and "Your dad would want peace," and "Carol lost her husband." I saved everything. Janet Rowe called me that afternoon. She had seen Carol's post. "Do you need a statement?" she asked. I closed my eyes because I had not wanted to ask her. She gave it anyway. She wrote that I had been the primary paperwork and care coordination contact, that I handled medication schedules, hospice calls, pharmacy delays, insurance issues, and funeral coordination, and that Carol had often deferred practical responsibilities to me. It was not emotional. It was better. It was factual. Carol tried to collect Dad's watch 2 days later. She arrived at my apartment with Amber and said personal items belonged in the widow's home. I did not let them inside. She stood in the hallway wearing oversized sunglasses and grief like armor. Your father would not want you hoarding his things, she said. I held the door halfway open. Dad gave me the watch. Amber laughed once. Convenient. I showed them a photo Janet had taken during Dad's final week. Dad's hand placing the watch in mine. I had not even known Janet captured it. Carol's mouth tightened. You are making this ugly. You made me a stranger at his memorial. Amber stepped forward. You barely came around before he got sick. That was the lie they needed most. I looked at her and said, I came around every time there was work you did not want photographed. The private truth room happened at my apartment table that evening because Carol demanded we settle this before lawyers embarrassed everyone. Present were Carol, Amber, Evan, Uncle Richard, Marin, and me. Evan looked miserable, which softened me for half a second. He was young enough to have been shaped by Carol's version, but old enough to hear the truth. On the table were Dad's watch, the memorial program, the slideshow email thread, funeral deposit receipt, hospice call logs, medication schedule texts, utility bills, bank transfer records, Janet's statement, Dad's will, and Dad's handwritten letter. Carol looked at the table and said, This is cruel. No, I said. This is the part you did not put in the slideshow. Amber crossed her arms. You always make yourself the victim. I placed the memorial program in front of her. My name is not in it. Carol said, That was an oversight. I placed my slideshow submission email beside the final slideshow list. My photos were removed after submission. Uncle Richard sighed. Grace, funerals are messy. Marin spoke for the first time. Removing a legal executor and biological daughter from a memorial program is not an accounting issue, but it is relevant to credibility. Carol glared at her. This is family. Marin replied, The estate is legal. The room changed with that sentence. Carol could control family rooms. She could not control legal ones. Then I placed the hospice call logs on the table. My number, my calls, my hours. Then the funeral deposit receipt, my card. Then the pharmacy messages, my texts. Then Janet's statement. Carol looked away. Amber said, Mom was grieving. You like paperwork. I looked at her and said, You liked emotional ownership without administrative labor. Evan flinched, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Then I placed the $48,700 transfer record on the table. Explain care support. Amber's face changed. Carol answered too quickly. Amber helped emotionally. Emotional support does not usually arrive in transfers under $10,000. Marin looked at the records. These will need documentation. Uncle Richard finally leaned forward. Carol, what is this? Carol snapped, I was trying to keep this family stable. I picked up Dad's letter and read the line aloud. If they make you stand outside my story, use the papers I left you and walk in through the front door. No one spoke. Dad's voice had entered the room in ink, and Carol could not interrupt him. I repeated the terms: full accounting, donation ledger, transfer documentation, house records, correct obituary, cooperate with executor process. Carol said, You are not the widow. I said, No, I am the executor. It was not the same thing. It was the thing she feared. The estate attorney meeting happened 2 days later in Marin's office, a calm room with gray walls, neat files, and a conference table where emotion had to sit beside documentation instead of on top of it. Present were Carol, Amber, Evan, Uncle Richard, Janet Rowe, Marin, and me. Carol wore black again, but this time it looked less like mourning and more like strategy. The house sale consultation had been canceled. The bank had paused informal access pending executor review. Memorial donations had not yet been deposited because I had requested the ledger. Carol looked at me like I had personally invented probate to hurt her. Marin opened by stating that I had accepted executor authority under Thomas Miller's will and that all estate assets, donations, disputed transfers, and pending sale actions required accounting. Carol immediately said, "Grace is using paperwork to punish me for a funeral misunderstanding." Marin looked at me, and I laid the memorial program on the table. Then the seating arrangement. Then the slideshow email. Then Dad's will. Then Dad's letter. Then Janet's statement. The sequence mattered. Erasure, labor, legal authority. Carol said I had barely helped. Janet corrected her calmly. Grace was the primary practical contact for hospice and medication coordination. Carol said Amber had been there every day. Janet said Amber visited. Grace coordinated care. The difference sat there like a blade. Amber tried to say the transfers were for household stability while Dad was sick. Marin asked for invoices, receipts, logs, or written authorization. Amber had none. Carol said Dad wanted Amber supported. Marin asked whether that wish was documented. Carol said, "He told me." Marin said, "The will tells us something else." That was the face-slap-proof moment. Carol's entire story depended on spoken grief. Dad's legal document said he trusted me to read the record. I placed the funeral deposit receipt beside the memorial program. They made me a daughter when bills were due and a stranger when the slideshow played, I said. Even Uncle Richard looked down. The consequences came without shouting. Marin froze the house sale until inventory and accounting were complete. The bank opened review of the pre-death transfers to Amber. Memorial donations had to be deposited into an estate-controlled account with a ledger. Amber had to document or return the $48,700. Carol lost informal control of estate decisions. The obituary correction was submitted with my name restored as Dad's daughter. The church luncheon Carol had planned at the house for that weekend was canceled after relatives began asking why the executor had been left out of the memorial program. Evan's support was preserved through the estate structure, which mattered to me. He was not responsible for his mother's erasure. He deserved stability without becoming Carol's shield. Carol cried in the parking lot afterward and said, "You humiliated a widow." I looked at Dad's watch on my wrist. No. I made the record tell the whole story. Amber hissed that I had always wanted to replace them. I said, I was not asking to replace anyone. I was asking not to be erased from my father's life. Uncle Richard apologized 3 weeks later, quietly, by voicemail, which is the way weak men apologize when they finally read documents. I did not call him back, but I saved it. The fallout was ugly, then strangely freeing. Some relatives kept believing Carol because grief makes people choose the version that requires less courage. Others apologized after seeing the corrected obituary and learning I had paid funeral costs. Janet stayed in touch. Marin walked me through every executor step with the patience of someone who knew this was both legal and deeply personal. Amber eventually returned part of the money and documented another portion badly enough that the estate attorney handled it formally. Carol fought every correction like each receipt was an insult. But the house did not sell in secret. The donations did not disappear into a widow's personal account. Dad's watch did not leave my wrist. And my name returned to the public record of his life. That mattered more than I expected. Not because paper replaces love, because paper can stop other people from stealing the last visible proof of it. Months later, Marin asked me to speak at a caregiver support workshop. At first, I refused. I did not want to become the woman whose stepmother cut her from a memorial. Marin said, "Then do not teach that. Teach what caregivers should save before grief becomes a weapon." So we created the Silver Watch Estate Boundary Guide with a caregiver nonprofit. We taught adult children how to document hospice contacts, funeral payments, medication logs, utility bills, bank transfers, memorial donations, executor rights, beneficiary forms, and obituary corrections. We taught them to send important photos directly to funeral directors, save call logs, ask for copies, document payments, and never assume private caregiving will be honored publicly by people who benefit from erasing it. The first line of the guide was Marin's: "Grief does not cancel fiduciary duty." The second was mine: "A memorial without the truth is just another inheritance fight wearing flowers." At the first workshop, I placed Dad's silver watch on the table. A woman in the front row started crying before I said a word. Afterward, she told me she had cared for her mother for 6 years, but her brother was already telling relatives she was too emotional to be involved in estate matters. We helped her make a folder, not a dramatic plan, a practical one. Receipts, contacts, medication logs, bank records. The kind of evidence that does not shout but does not disappear either. That became the redemption. Not Carol's embarrassment, not Amber having to answer for transfers, not relatives whispering the truth after the church luncheon was canceled. The real redemption was watching caregivers realize they were allowed to keep records of love. That love did not become less pure because it had receipts. That asking to be seen was not greed. That being erased after doing the hard work is its own kind of theft. I still keep Dad's silver wristwatch on my desk when I am not wearing it. Sometimes before a workshop, I wind it even though it no longer keeps perfect time. I remember the memorial chapel, the missing photos, Carol's voice saying, "First family," Amber's speech, Janet's still face, and the program with my name absent from my own father's life. Then I remember Marin's office, the will on the table, Dad's letter, the transfer records, and the moment Carol learned that the daughter she pushed out of the family row was the one legally responsible for opening every locked drawer. A family that calls you cruel for asking to be seen after using your labor in private does not want peace. It wants your grief without your place. I was not asking for money. I was asking not to be erased from my father's life. If your family made you useful when bills were due, and invisible when memories were displayed, would you still call that respect? And if the watch your father placed in your hand became the thing that taught other caregivers to protect their time, their records, and their place in the story, would you hide it away to keep a widow comfortable? Or would you set it on the table and let time tell everyone what love would not?